When Daniel offered water to a dying Apache woman, he never imagined he was unleashing a storm. At dawn, 300 warriors would surround his ranch, and between fire, love, and fate, he would discover that compassion can defy empires. Somewhere between duty and his own soul, that simple gesture would become legend, because in that land, a single sip of water would change the course of 2 worlds forever. The sun was sinking over the desert hills, painting the horizon in reds and copper tones, when Daniel rode back toward his lonely ranch after a long, exhausting day. The wind carried the bitter scent of drought, and the world seemed to hang in a suspended silence. In the distance, something broke that stillness. A tall, motionless figure leaned against the fence on the edge of his property. Daniel frowned, at first thinking it was a shadow or a wounded animal, but as he drew closer, he saw it was a woman. Her skin was covered in dust and dried blood, her bare feet marked by deep cuts. She was taller than any woman he had ever seen. Her breathing was shallow, and though her eyes were heavy with exhaustion, they still held a fierce, unbroken light. Daniel stopped, unsure whether he should approach. The woman watched him as if weighing his intention, then took a staggering step back, trying to remain on her feet. When she finally spoke, her voice came out rough with thirst, barely more than a whisper. "Water." Without hesitation, Daniel lowered the bucket into the well and filled a clay jug. He walked toward her slowly, both hands held out in front of him. "I won't hurt you," he said calmly. The woman stared at him, wary, but the sound of water was stronger than her fear. She drank greedily, letting some of it spill down her throat and chest. When she finished, she met his eyes. She said nothing, but there was an ancient wordless gesture of respect in the way she inclined her head before her strength gave out, and she dropped to her knees, breathing as if her soul had suddenly become too heavy to carry. Daniel caught her before she collapsed face first into the dust. "Easy," he murmured. He carried her into the barn, laid her gently on a blanket, and lit a lamp. In the soft glow, he saw tribal markings painted across her skin. Apache symbols, old and almost sacred. He understood then that this woman was not just anyone. She was a daughter of the desert, a warrior. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. Her lips parted just enough for a single word. "Clara." It was all she managed before passing out. The night moved slowly. Outside, coyotes howled in the distance. Daniel kept watch by her side, listening to her ragged breathing. In the silence, he felt something shift in the air, as if the desert itself were holding its breath. At first light, Clara's eyes opened. She tried to sit up, but the pain forced her to remain still. "Where am I?" she whispered. "At my ranch," he answered. "I found you almost dead." She nodded, showing neither gratitude nor fear, only a stern, unbending dignity. "You should have left me where I was," she said in a low, rough voice. "I couldn't," Daniel replied. "You're a human being, not an enemy." Clara studied him as if trying to see through his words into the core beneath them. "Your people don't think that way." He allowed himself a faint smile. "I'm not my people." A gust of wind shook the barn door and his horse snorted uneasily. Clara felt it too. "There are spirits watching," she said under her breath. "When the debt of water is paid with compassion, balance is broken." Daniel frowned. "What balance?" She looked away, as if speaking of something dangerous. "The one that separates our lands from yours. You crossed a line, rancher." He drew in a long breath, not fully understanding. "I only gave you water." Her gaze softened, shadowed by a kind of sadness. "And that is enough." The day dragged by. Daniel went out to work the corrals, but his thoughts kept circling back to her face, to the strange mixture of strength and pain that made it impossible to forget her. When he returned to the barn, Clara was already on her feet. She had washed her face and mended her clothes with strips of cloth. Her bearing was imposing now, her eyes clear and steady. "I'll leave at nightfall," she said, without preamble. "I don't want to bring misfortune here." "Misfortune?" he asked. Yes, she replied. My people will see what you did as an offense. They'll believe you took me as spoils, and they'll come. A chill ran down his spine. Then stay until you're healed. Clara shook her head. Danger doesn't heal, it grows. The sun sank behind the hills, and Daniel prepared a simple supper. Clara ate in silence, watching every move he made, as if studying the language of another world. You're not afraid, she said finally. No, he answered. Fear dries you out worse than the desert. Clara smiled for the first time, a small, fleeting curve of her lips. You talk like an old man. I am one, Daniel replied with a soft laugh. She studied him with a different light in her eyes. You don't speak like a man who's lost everything. He said nothing. He didn't want to admit she was right. Night fell completely. The moon hung in the sky like an open wound. Clara walked to the well and knelt beside it. She touched the surface of the water with her fingertips, murmuring words in her own language. Daniel watched her from a distance, unwilling to interrupt. Suddenly she lifted her head. They already know. Her voice was firm, resigned. Who? He asked. My people. Those who guard the border between the living and the dead. Tomorrow the wind will bring hoofbeats, fire, and judgment. Daniel clenched his fists. I won't let them take you. Clara looked at him with a tenderness that surprised them both. You can't fight a storm. Then I'll face it with you, he said quietly. She lowered her head. Do you know what that means? Yes, he replied without hesitation. A deep silence settled around them, the air vibrating between them like a taut string. Clara reached out and touched his cheek with the back of her fingers. You're a strange man, Daniel. You give water and ask for nothing. He held her gaze. And you drink it without thanking me, but with honor. She smiled faintly. Maybe the gods heard you before they heard me. The wind shifted direction. The horses whinnied restlessly. In the distance, a drumbeat rose from the hills. Clara stood slowly. They're coming. Daniel grabbed his rifle even though he knew it would be useless against what approached. Then let them come, he muttered. Clara gave him one last look before stepping back into the barn. Tomorrow, when the sun rises, the fire will decide whether the water was a sin or a blessing. The drum sounded again, louder and closer. When Daniel looked toward the horizon, he saw lights flickering like stars behind a veil of dust, torches, hundreds of them. He swallowed hard, knowing dawn would bring more than sunlight. The wind carried with it a mixture of fear and destiny. He took a deep breath, glanced at the well, and remembered Clara's face reflected in its water. In that moment he understood that his life was no longer his alone. Storm clouds gathered, darkening the sky. The first lightning bolts tore across the night like a warning. Daniel went to the barn, where Clara was praying softly. Who are you talking to? He asked. To those who still listen, she answered. To those who understand that water remembers. Thunder rumbled in the distance, announcing the arrival of dawn. Daniel leaned against the doorframe, watching as the darkness slowly retreated. He knew there was no turning back. He had given water to a stranger, and in doing so, had awakened an entire people. And somewhere behind that story, another voice slipped through the old wood and the night air, a voice that didn't belong to the desert at all. If you don't want to miss more of our stories, hit the like button and subscribe below. Turn on the notification bell and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. We're grateful for your support. The day that followed moved as slowly as smoke from a campfire that refused to die. Daniel worked without purpose, fixing things that didn't really need repair just to avoid looking toward the hills, where the warriors remained still and silent. The horses refused to eat. The cattle sniffed the air and huddled together nervously, as if sensing something invisible moving among them. Every sound, every motion felt louder than it should have, as though the whole world were holding its breath again. That night, Daniel lit a lamp and watched the flame bend and tremble in the draft that slipped through the cracks in the walls. The silence was so deep that even his own breathing felt like an intrusion. Every now and then he glanced through the window, expecting to see the glow of a campfire or the flash of steel. But there was nothing, only darkness and the certainty that eyes were watching him from some hidden vantage point. He barely slept, and when dawn once more stained the sky, something was different. The air smelled changed, less of fear and more of damp earth. A clay bowl sat on the ground by his front door, filled with roasted corn and dried meat. There were no footprints around it, no sound of retreating steps, only that silent offering. Daniel stooped, touched the bowl, and carried it inside, not entirely sure what it meant. A warning, a sign of respect, another test. He decided not to eat it, though hunger burned his stomach. He did not yet trust whatever game was being played. Hours passed, and his solitude began to feel different. It was no longer pure fear. It was expectation. Something was about to happen. By mid-afternoon, the sound came. A drum, distant and steady, like a heartbeat coming from inside the earth itself. Daniel stepped out onto the porch and looked toward the hills. The drum's echo bounced off the rocks, deep and primitive. Then he saw Clara. She was descending the slope alone this time. She carried a spear adorned with red feathers, her face painted with black war lines along her cheekbones. Her presence was majestic, almost otherworldly. She crossed the valley unhurriedly, keeping her eyes locked on his. When she reached the well, she planted her spear and spoke. Her voice was stronger now, sure of itself. "My father says that if a man has a good heart, he doesn't fear looking the one he saved in the eye." Daniel nodded without moving. "I'm not afraid of you." She inclined her head. "Then walk with me." It was not an invitation, it was a command. He followed her uphill to a stretch of ground where the stones shone under the sun. The warriors watched from afar, but did not interfere. Clara walked tall and straight, each step deliberate, her long braid whipping behind her like a living rope in the wind. Daniel could hardly believe this was the same woman he had found on the verge of death 2 days earlier. They reached a rocky outcrop where symbols had been carved into the stone, ancient marks that seemed to tell a story. Clara ran her fingers over one of the figures. "My mother is buried here," she said. She was a woman who spoke with the wind. Daniel bowed his head respectfully. "Your father sent for me," he guessed. She shook her head with quiet certainty. "No, I sent for you. A father doesn't always command the heart." Her words surprised him, but her tone left no room for doubt. She was strong, yes, but there was also a restrained sadness in her. The wind kicked up dust around them. Clara's gaze bore into him. "You're not a man who kills for pleasure. You live alone because you don't want to see any more blood." Daniel stared, unsettled. "How do you know that?" She touched her chest. "Eyes tell everything, even when mouths stay closed." For the first time, he allowed himself to smile. "And you, why did you test me like that? It could have cost you your life." Clara lifted her face toward the sky. "I wanted to prove I'm not just my father's shadow, but the sun almost burned me away." They stood in silence for a while. The drums had stopped. Only the wind remained, whispering through the dust between them. Daniel finally broke the quiet. "If your father knew you were speaking to me like this, what would he do?" "He would wait for the sky to speak first," she replied, still staring into the distance. "My people believe every act has an echo. If you gave water, the water must return. If you gave life, someone will come to see if you deserve it." Daniel did not fully understand, but he nodded. Clara scooped up a handful of earth and let it slip slowly between her fingers. "This land saw you give without asking in return. The land doesn't forget." Then she turned and began walking back, letting the wind carry her words away like dust. When they returned to the valley, the warriors were no longer where they had been. They had vanished like smoke, leaving no trace. "Did they leave?" Daniel asked, scanning the horizon. Clara answered with a barely visible smile. "Spirits never leave, they only move." She mounted her horse again and looked down at him. "I'll come back tomorrow. If the sun finds you still here, I'll tell you why the warriors did not cross your fence." He watched her ride away until nothing remained but the dust hanging in the air. That night, Daniel did not sleep. He sat on the porch staring at the stars. Something inside him had shifted, a strange mixture of fear and fascination. This woman was not only a warrior, she was a bridge between two worlds that had never understood each other. The air grew cold, and for a moment he thought he heard footsteps around the ranch, whispers, voices that did not belong to any living person. When dawn finally found him, the bowl at his doorstep had been replaced by something else, a single white feather, spotless, perfect. Daniel held the feather between his fingers. Something deep in his chest told him this was not an ending, but the beginning of something the earth itself had been waiting for. The new morning brought a different kind of silence. It was not emptiness, but anticipation, as though the land itself stood ready for a decision. He stepped into the yard and noticed small tracks around the well, light, delicate, not human, childlike footprints that did not quite belong to a child. He looked around uneasily. The valley appeared unchanged, but the air felt heavier, laden with an invisible murmur. The warriors could not be seen, yet he knew they were there, merged with stone and sand and horizon. A flicker of movement drew his eye to the rocks to the east. Clara emerged astride the same painted horse, this time wearing a plain leather tunic, her face clean, without war paint. She carried no spear, but she radiated purpose. Daniel waited on the porch as she dismounted without a word and walked toward him. Her steps were steady, unhurried, fearless. When she stood in front of him, she dropped something to the ground, a polished stone engraved with the symbol of a sun. "My father says the sun saw what you did," she said. "If you had lied, the wind would have erased you from this land already." Daniel watched her in silence, feeling the weight of those words. It was more than poetry. It was a suspended sentence. Clara lifted the stone and set it on the edge of the well. "Now the water belongs to you too," she said quietly. "You are part of the circle, even if you didn't ask to be." Daniel inclined his head, understanding that this was no small promise. She walked over to the corral. The horses, nervous for days, calmed as soon as she approached. One even stepped forward and brushed her arm with its muzzle. Daniel watched, a strange peace tangled with awe. "Animals know before we do," Clara said without turning around. "They feel when death is coming or when life decides to stay." Daniel allowed himself a faint smile. "And what do they feel now?" She glanced at him from the corner of her eye. "That something new is breathing in this place." The wind blew gently, teasing dust and dry leaves across the yard. For a moment, it seemed the valley itself was listening. Clara approached the well again and leaned over, staring at her reflection in the water. "Here a life ends, or another begins," she murmured. Daniel walked closer. "What does that mean?" She met his gaze with piercing intensity. "My father doesn't trust you yet. He says a man who gives water can also give betrayal." "And you?" Daniel asked. "I trust the heart more than I trust men," she answered softly. A heavy silence followed. The surface of the water trembled with the breeze, as if the conversation had fallen into its depths. Daniel studied her for a moment, then spoke in a low voice. "I don't know if I deserve your faith, but I'm not lying." Clara drew a deep breath, closed her eyes, then nodded. "Then I'll show you something few white eyes have ever seen." She walked toward the edge of the valley, and he followed without question, their boots crunching over dry grass that broke like fragile bone underfoot. They climbed a narrow path where the stones glowed with a reddish sheen. The sun was beginning to sink behind the mountains when they reached a plateau overlooking the entire valley. From there, the ranch looked like a small, lonely dot. Clara raised her arm and pointed west. "There, where the clouds seem to rest on the ground, is my people's village. No one of your race has ever come this close." Her voice held a mix of pride and warning. Daniel said nothing. The breeze carried the scent of wood smoke and wildflowers. She turned to him, My father thinks the gods left you here to be tested. I think they left you here to remember. Remember what? He asked. That water doesn't belong to a man, neither does the land or the blood. Only the spirit that respects them. Her words fell into him like an old echo, something older than both of them. Daniel looked at her with genuine respect. Maybe that's what we forgot. She smiled faintly. Maybe that's why you're still alive. They descended from the ridge in silence. The sky burned orange and violet. When they reached the ranch, Clara stopped by the well and laid her hand on the stone engraved with the sun. This mark doesn't break, she said. As long as it's here, no warrior will cross your fence. Daniel looked at her with gratitude. I don't know how to repay you for this. Clara's expression remained calm. You don't repay what is given in truth. The air began to cool, and a coyote howled far away. Clara mounted her horse again. Don't follow me tomorrow, she warned. If you do, the spirits will think you don't trust them. Let them decide if you are worthy of their silence. Daniel nodded. I'll wait. She inclined her head in a gesture that was almost a farewell and rode off into the mist of evening. Her figure blended with the dust until she disappeared completely. The valley was still again, but something in its stillness had changed. That night, Daniel spotted the distant glow of a campfire. It was not a threat, but a message, a spark in the desert like an eye that refused to close. He knew Clara was out there, watching from her own world. Inside the cabin, the white feather lay on the table. Daniel picked it up and placed it in a glass beside the sunstone. Two different worlds, two promises that the wind, perhaps, still remembered. When he lay down, sleep brought him images of water running between mountains, of Clara walking through shadows and the fire of a sun that did not burn, only illuminated the secrets of the earth. He woke before dawn, heart pounding. On the horizon, the warriors were gone. Only the mountains, the silence, and a new kind of calm remained. Daniel understood then that what had begun as a simple act of compassion was becoming something neither he nor Clara would be able to stop. The next morning arrived with the smell of smoke. Daniel stepped out of the ranch house and saw a dark ribbon twisting up from the horizon. Fire again, not his, but a blaze burning in the forest to the west. Something was moving beyond the hills. He took his rifle by instinct but did not load it. His gaze drifted across the dust dancing in the light. The silence hanging in the air was thick, the kind that precedes a decision that will change everything. A galloping horse thundered behind the barn. It was Clara, wearing a dark fur cloak, her expression hard, stripped of the quiet peace she had shown in the last few days. She carried a spear, and around her arm was tied a red braid with feathers. "My father is coming," she said, her voice tight. "Not with words," she glanced toward the drifting smoke, "but with fire." Daniel lowered his gun and stepped forward. "Why now?" She met his eyes with sorrow. "Because they believe you stole the gods' silence. You gave compassion to a daughter of the mountains, and the spirits saw it in the water. That broke the line between our worlds. They want to restore the balance with blood." Daniel exhaled heavily. "So did you come to warn me, or to bring me to judgment?" Clara held his gaze for a long moment before answering. "I came because I don't want to watch you die, but my loyalty is torn between my blood and what I feel." Her confession fell like thunder. The wind carried the echo away, leaving only the pounding of their hearts. Daniel realized this woman was neither enemy nor ally. She was a soul trapped between two lands that were never meant to touch. "I can leave," he offered, trying to ease her burden. "If that stops a war, I'll go." Clara shook her head firmly. "If you run, they will hunt you. The elders will say you confessed your guilt. It isn't escape that will save you, but courage in the face of their anger." The sun climbed slowly, bathing the valley in gold. In the distance, shapes began to emerge. Warriors on horseback, armed with lances, bows, and fire. 300 men advanced like a living storm toward Daniel's small, solitary ranch. "Stay inside," he told Clara. knowing she would never obey. She smiled sadly. I can't hide from my people's judgment, but I can speak before the arrows decide anything. Daniel nodded. Then we speak the truth. When the warriors surrounded the property, dust clouded the sky. Hooves beat the ground with the rhythm of a drum. From their center rode an old man with a headdress of bone. His eyes looked like they had been carved from stone. This was Clara's father. Daniel stepped forward without weapons, carrying only the sunstone in his hand. The old man glared at him with contempt and spat on the ground. The white man who steals water doesn't fear death, but he deserves it all the same. Clara stepped between them. Father, he didn't steal anything. He saved me. The old man stared at her, incredulous. Saved, he repeated harshly. He touched you with hands that don't share our blood. He already stained your spirit. Clara trembled, but didn't retreat. Then let the gods judge, not you. Her father raised his spear. The gods speak through fire. He shouted an order in Apache, and the warriors lowered their torches. In seconds, the fences around the ranch were burning. Smoke rose in thick columns, and the house became a circle of flames. Daniel ran to the well, hauling up bucket after bucket, trying to keep the entrance clear. Clara reached him and grabbed his arm. Don't fight the fire, Daniel. Let it purge what needs to die. He looked at her desperately. And if what dies is us? She met his eyes and squeezed his wrist. Then we die clean. When the old man saw them standing side by side, his rage ignited. He yelled again, and 3 warriors drew their bows, arrows aimed at Daniel's chest. Clara instantly moved in front of him, arms outstretched. No one shoots, she commanded. The air went taut, as if everything in the world were pulled to a breaking point. One young warrior, reckless and impatient, loosed his arrow too soon. The arrow flew toward Daniel, but Clara intercepted it with her spear, deflecting it inches from his heart. The fire reflected in her furious eyes. Enough, she cried, her voice roaring louder than the blaze itself. If his crime was giving water, then I am guilty too, because I drank from his hands. The warriors lowered their eyes. The old man clenched his fists, trembling between fury and doubt. Flames leaped and crackled, painting everyone's faces with red light. Daniel panted, stunned, as the woman who had come to warn him now stood defending him against her own people. Let me speak to him, he whispered to Clara. She held his gaze. If you speak, the path of fate will change. He stepped toward her father anyway, walking through heat and smoke, each step a challenge to his fear. He stopped in front of the old man and dropped the sunstone at his feet. Your daughter taught me water belongs to everyone, Daniel said steadily. If that's a sin, then let you be the one to punish me. The old man regarded him in silence, his eyes reflecting the fire and centuries of weariness. For a suspended instant, the world stopped. Clara held her breath. Slowly, the old man bent down, picked up the stone, and held it close to the flames. Fire burns away lies, he murmured. He threw the stone into the heart of the blaze. For several seconds it glowed, brighter and brighter, but it did not crack. The old man lowered his gaze, shaken. The gods don't lie, he said hoarsely. The white man speaks truth. A murmur rippled through the warriors. Spears dipped, horses shifted uneasily, and the wind turned, changing the smell of the air. Clara closed her eyes as tears mingled with smoke on her cheeks. Daniel could hardly believe judgment had passed. The old man turned to his daughter. Your fate no longer belongs to us, he said. Then he faced Daniel. A man's compassion is not punished, but the world will remember this day as a crack between our lands. He turned his horse and rode away, his people following, disappearing little by little into the distance. The fire gradually died down. Ash blanketed the valley, but the ranch still stood. Clara walked among the charred boards, touching the burnt wood with reverent fingers. Everything that dies makes room for something new, she said softly. Daniel watched her with a mix of relief and gratitude. What are we now? He asked. She met his eyes calmly. We are what remains after the fire. At that moment, A gust of wind lifted the last glowing embers into the sky like fleeting stars. The sun sank behind the mountains, and for the first time the valley no longer felt divided. The water in the well reflected both their faces together, the Apache woman and the rancher, two souls bound by fire, water, and truth. The next dawn brought a deceptive calm. The valley smelled of damp earth and charred wood. Daniel rose before the sun and stared at the mist covering the hills where, only hours before, the line between life and death had burned. Clara slept by the cold ashes of the fire, her face streaked with soot and peace. For the first time in days, her breathing was even and quiet. Daniel watched her in silence with a respect that went beyond any words. But on the horizon, another kind of storm was approaching. Dust rose under the hooves of new horses. Not Apaches this time, but territorial soldiers in blue uniforms. Daniel recognized them the moment he saw the glint of their brass insignias. "Damn," he muttered through clenched teeth. They were not 300 warriors, only 30 men, but they carried rifles, authority, and orders to punish. The captain at the front raised his hand. "We're looking for the man who made deals with the Apaches without government permission," he shouted. Daniel knew instantly they were talking about him. Clara stirred at the sound of strange voices. Her eyes darkened. "Men of iron and fire," she whispered. "They come to claim what they think is theirs." Daniel touched her arm. "You won't say a word. This isn't yours. It's my fight." She shook her head slowly. "Anything that touches my soul belongs to me now too, Daniel." The captain dismounted stiffly and approached. "So the sinner lives," he sneered. "Where are the savages who were surrounding you?" Daniel met his gaze without flinching. "Gone while you were still asleep in your beds." The captain struck him across the face with the butt of his rifle. "You've got too much mouth for a traitor." Daniel spat blood into the dust. "And you use a uniform to hide your fear." The soldiers tensed up, hands shifting on their weapons. Clara took a step forward. "If you touch him again, there won't be a single man left standing here." The captain turned toward her, surprised by her height and the strength radiating from her. "An Indian," he said with cold delight. "Perfect. Two birds with one stone." He reached for her arm, but Clara seized his wrist with such force the metal of his glove creaked. The soldiers raised their guns in an instant. Daniel moved between them. "Put those down," he shouted. "If you fire, you'll bring the war right back here." Nobody moved. The silence stretched until the wind sighed between the horses. Finally, the captain lowered his hand. "Search the ranch. If we find anything, they both die." Clara looked at him with open contempt. "You don't need to look for anything," she said quietly. "Truth doesn't hide under dust." The men ransacked the barn, overturned buckets, tore fabric, pried open crates. Daniel stayed where he was. He knew that sooner or later they would find the sunstone. When the captain finally pulled it from the debris, he smiled, triumphant. "This is all the proof I need," he said. "Apache symbol, pagan magic. That's treason." Daniel stepped forward. "That stone isn't yours," he said firmly. "It's a gift." "Then die with your gifts," the captain replied, raising his rifle. The shot never rang out. A deep roar swallowed it. From the forest, a column of smoke surged upward, followed by the echo of drums. The Apaches had returned. Daniel felt his heart slam against his ribs. Clara looked skyward. "They don't forgive what still bleeds," she said. The soldiers turned their rifles toward the trees. "Formation!" the captain bellowed. In the chaos, Daniel snatched the stone from his hands and hurled it into the well. "No one uses it as a weapon," he declared. Clara's eyes met his, and she understood everything that choice meant. A war cry thundered across the valley, and arrows rained down from the hillside. The soldiers answered with gunfire. Battle returned to the land of water and dust, and soon the ground was streaked with red. Daniel ran toward Clara, trying to shield her from the crossfire. She shoved him back. "Don't die for me," she pleaded. He gave a bitter smile. "Too late for that." An explosion shattered the air. The barn erupted in flames, horses bolting in panicked terror. The captain, wounded, still fired blindly, driven by fear and rage. Clara shouted something in her language and the warriors halted their advance, hovering at the edge of the firelight. She walked into the center of the chaos, without a weapon. "Enough!" she cried, her voice cut through smoke and screams. "This fire brings no justice, only ruin." Silence fell, thick and fragile. Daniel staggered, covered in dust and ashes. "What are you doing?" he demanded, panic in his voice. Clara lifted her arms toward the sky. "I surrender my fate." From the ground, the captain raised his rifle again, hatred burning in his eyes. The shot echoed through the valley. Clara dropped to her knees, the air leaving her lungs in a broken gasp. Daniel ran to her and caught her as she fell. "No, no, no," he whispered, his voice cracking. She smiled faintly. "The water called me back," she breathed. Her fingers brushed his face. The wind rose, swirling ash around them in a dark halo. The warriors knelt in silence, honoring her. The captain tried to get up, but a young Apache knocked him down. "Your war is over," the warrior said, breaking the rifle and tossing it aside. Daniel didn't look. He held Clara tightly, feeling life slip through his hands. Deep below, at the bottom of the well, the sunstone began to shine. A golden glow spread upward through the darkness, illuminating every face around it. Clara opened her eyes one last time. "Remember the water," she whispered, then went still, as if only sleeping beneath the light. The fire died on its own. The wind scattered the smoke. The Apaches departed slowly, leaving the rancher alone with his promise and his grief. The sun slid behind the hill, pouring an impossible calm over the valley. Daniel remained by the well all night. He did not cry. He simply stared at the stone's reflection beneath the water, knowing that Clara was still there somehow, bound to the land they had defended together with truth and blood. When dawn came, the ranch lay in ruins, but the well's water was clear and untouched. Daniel drank a single sip and felt something familiar. It was as if Clara's voice still murmured his name in the ripples. He closed his eyes and heard her words. "What is born in fire does not fear the sun." He gave a weak smile, then saddled his horse and rode away, leaving behind land that had once been a battlefield and was now a sanctuary of love and redemption. The years passed like wind across the plains, silent, unstoppable. Nobody spoke any more about the burned ranch or the towering woman who stopped a war. Only the water in the well remained, clear and singing under the sun. Daniel lived like a wanderer, carrying a silence in his chest that neither time nor whiskey could wash away. He slept under nameless stars, always dreaming of a voice telling him that the water still remembered his promise. One evening, while the sky blazed in copper tones, he decided to return. His horse followed forgotten paths, through twisted cacti and hills that still bore scars of fire. Every stone felt like it knew his name. The ranch was gone, reduced to ruins, a skeleton of wood and dust. But the well remained, untouched, as if time had bowed and stepped aside for it. Daniel dismounted, knelt, and peered into its depths. The reflection in the water threw him back years into the past. He saw Clara's face, her steady gaze, her voice soothing chaos. When he touched the surface with his fingers, a circle of light expanded outward, as if the well were waking from a deep sleep. The air changed. A whisper crossed the valley. It was soft, almost impossible to hear, yet full of life. Daniel closed his eyes. The whisper spoke his name, not as an echo from long ago, but as a call still very much alive. Suddenly, the wind rose and the water began to move. From its center, a figure emerged, translucent and gleaming, formed of light and dust. It was Clara, but no longer entirely human, more spirit and river woven into a single presence. Daniel stepped back, not in fear, but in awe. She smiled like she had the first time she drank from his hand. "You promised to protect the water," she said, "and you kept your word." Her voice was a melody. Her presence embraced rather than burned. He fell to his knees. "Clara, there wasn't a single day I didn't search for you." She reached out a luminous hand. You never had to search, she replied. I was in every drop, in every rain that touched your skin. Her words wrapped around him like the first light of dawn. The valley responded. Green shoots began to push through the cracks in the ground. Where ashes once lay, white lilies bloomed. Daniel understood then that the well was more than water. It was life itself, safeguarding the soul of someone who had loved more than she loved herself. Why did you come back? Clara asked, her voice holding endless tenderness. Because the world lost its shape without you, he answered. She tilted her face toward him. Then look closely, Daniel, because the world still holds me, even if you no longer see me with mortal eyes. Tears traced paths down his weathered cheeks. I don't want you to disappear again. She smiled and touched his chest with her glowing hand. I can't disappear as long as you remember me. A soft light flared between her fingers and the water turned gold. The sound of the wind shifted. It no longer moaned, it sang. The lilies swayed as if breathing in time with the new song. Clara gazed at him one last time. What began with water ends with water, and begins again with love. Daniel nodded, unable to speak. Slowly she faded, fusing with the well until only the reflection of the moon remained on the surface. For a heartbeat, her smiling face shone in that reflection, eternal. Silence returned, but it was no longer lonely. It was peace. Daniel sat beside the well, breathing slowly, listening to the faint murmur that lingered. Water remembers, he repeated to himself, and for the first time those words did not hurt. That night he stayed there, building a small fire and watching the stars. The sky looked clearer, as if the valley had been washed clean of its guilt. The wind blew from the north, carrying the scent of rain. At dawn, the first rays of light fell on the well, and a golden radiance spread over the land. The water shone brightly, reflecting not only the sky, but a face blended with its light. Clara was still there, watchful, eternal. Daniel smiled and stood. Then I'll keep protecting the water, he said. His voice shook, but not with sorrow. It carried the resolve of someone who understands that love doesn't die. It only changes form. He mounted his horse and looked back one last time. In the distance, the valley was blooming. New streams sprang out of the ground, winding their way into the desert. Where battle once reigned, life now flowed. The echo of a distant drum drifted through the air, as if Apache elders were blessing the new dawn. Each step of Daniel's horse left prints on living earth. He lifted his face to the sun, feeling the weight of the years fall away. The wind carried a gentle voice woven with the sound of water. Come back whenever your soul needs it, it whispered. Daniel smiled. I always will. The trail carried him beyond the hills, where the cacti swayed like sentinels. In the well, the reflection of the sky shifted. For an instant, two shadows appeared side by side, as if they still walked together. As time went on, travelers found their way to that place. They said the well's water healed wounds, and that if you listened carefully, you could hear a woman singing and a man answering with calm gratitude. No one knew their names. Some called them guardians. Others spoke of spirits of fire and water. But everyone agreed on one thing. The air there felt different, lighter, as if love itself had left an invisible trace. When the sun went down, the well would glow again, casting a golden shimmer across the valley. It was the sunstone, still intact, turning slowly beneath the surface, guarding the pact of two souls that never truly parted. And so the wind kept blowing, the flowers kept blooming, and the water kept remembering. Somewhere in the folds of time, Clara and Daniel still look at each other, eternal guardians of the valley where compassion proved stronger than war.